We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone.
Hello and magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat and welcome to this event hosted by the Beda Society of Young Astronomers entitled Starry Night 2021. I am Professor Jun Cajigal and Starry Night 2021 is an online or virtual telescope workshop and a virtual or online telescope viewing. Now, because of this COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of stargazing events have been postponed or canceled this year. Now, however, the great thing about this event called Starry Night is that it can be as social or as isolated as you like. Now, with the COVID-19 protocols in place, we will bring the telescope to you, my dear netizens, and we will gaze upon the heavens virtually. Now, you can even conduct a Facebook watch party with your family members and friends as we point our telescopes at the night sky. Now, Starry Night can also be a stress reliever. Now, a study suggested that those who stargaze feel more connected to nature. A range of other benefits were also highlighted, including experiencing positive emotions. Now, from a health and well-being perspective, we have seen a huge increase in interest in astronomy during the general community quarantine. And as people have felt like they're stuck at home or there's nowhere to go, more of us have been going out into the garden and gazing upon the stars. So join us as we bring the telescopes to you and virtually gaze upon the heavens. We shall first proceed with part 1 of this event, which is a telescope workshop, and will be followed later on by a virtual or online telescope viewing of the night sky. Now, if you have any questions or comments about the lecture later on, please feel free to type in your questions or comments in the comment section below, and we will be glad to answer all your queries and questions about this telescope workshop and even in the virtual telescope viewing. So join us as we study the telescope here in part 1 of Starry Night 2021. We shall learn about the telescope through this telescope workshop. And later on, after this, we will proceed with the virtual telescope viewing of the night sky. Good day, my dear netizens, ladies and gentlemen. So, for today, we will be tackling the tools of the astronomer. And one of the important tools of the modern astronomer is the telescope. Okay, the telescope is like an extension of the human eye. Okay, the human eye has its limitations. So the human eye cannot observe or perceive very small objects. So that's why we need to extend our vision. We need an instrument like the microscope so that we can observe very small objects. And the human eye also cannot perceive very far or distant objects. So we need an extension of our eye. So we need the telescope. Okay? And who invented the telescope? Now, it was not Galileo. Okay, many of you might think that it was Galileo who invented the telescope. The telescope was invented by Hans Lippershey. Okay, he's a Dutch lens maker, Hans Lippershey. Alright, so this was his telescope. So his telescope was made of 2 lenses, okay, placed at opposite ends of this tube. Alright, so that was the first telescope that Hans Lippershey had made. Okay, then Galileo got heard of this instrument made by Hans Lippershey, so he made one for himself. Okay, and that was the telescope made by Galileo. It's similar to Hans Lippershey, but his telescope was far more powerful than Hans Lippershey. Okay, his telescope can magnify up to 30 times. And what's good about his telescope is that Galileo pointed his telescope towards the night sky. Okay, and with his telescope, he discovered the 4 largest moons of Jupiter, which we now call as the Galilean moons. Galileo also observed the craters of the moon. You know, before, the people thought that the moon was just a smooth white ball, crystal ball. But when Galileo pointed his telescope towards the moon, Galileo saw craters, Galileo saw plains and mountains. Okay? And Galileo also observed Venus. And he noticed through his telescope that Venus changes shape or phases, much like our moon. Okay? And with this observation, it supported the Copernican model of the solar system. Okay? Alright, now everybody turn to the diagram. So this was the telescope that Galileo had assembled. So it's composed of a double convex lens. That's the objective lens of his telescope. And the eyepiece was a double concave lens. Alright, so this is the Galilean telescope that he assembled. Alright, advantages. The final image is erect or upright. and it is useful for terrestrial observations. Alright, one disadvantage of the Galilean telescope is that it has a small field of view. Later, we shall discuss what field of view is. Alright? Okay, so this was the Galilean telescope that Galileo Galilei assembled. Alright, and turn to this diagram. Johannes Kepler also designed a telescope. His telescope was composed of a double convex lens as the objective lens. And look at the eyepiece. The eyepiece is also a double convex lens, unlike that of Galileo's telescope. Okay, the advantage of the Keplerian telescope is that it has a wider field of view. Alright? Okay, so what are the different types of telescopes? Okay, first we have what we call a refracting telescope. Okay, a refracting telescope is a telescope that uses lenses, okay, to bend or to refract light. Okay, so like the one made by Galileo and Hans Lippershey. Okay, the Galilean telescope and even the telescope assembled by Johannes Kepler, they're all refracting telescope that uses lenses to produce a magnified image of the distant object. Okay, so my dear netizens, here is the basic design of a refracting telescope. Okay, this is similar to the Keplerian design. So we have here the objective lens. The objective lens is a double convex lens that collects incoming light. Okay, and the objective lens produces an initial magnified image. Then the initial magnified image is further enlarged by the eyepiece, the eyepiece lens. The eyepiece lens is also a double convex lens. Okay, so that's the basic design of the refracting telescope. Alright, so here is a modern refracting telescope used by many amateur astronomers, including me. Yan, so ito yung ginagamit ko din. Meron akong ganyan na refracting telescope. Okay, so this type of telescope is a refracting telescope. So a refracting telescope uses lenses to produce a magnified image of the distant object. So there are two major lenses here. We have here the objective lens. Okay, the objective lens collects the light from the distant object, and at the opposite end of the telescope tube is the eyepiece lens. Okay, so this telescope is similar to the one made by Hans Lippershey, by Galileo, and by Johannes Kepler. So, and this telescope is mounted on an altazimuth mount or altazimuthal mount. So in this type of mount, there are two movements. So we have the left and right movement, like so, and the up and down movement. So this type of mount is called an altazimuth or altazimuthal mount. Okay, so advantages of this telescope. This telescope is rigid, sturdy. You don't need to align the lenses, and it's quite good. The only disadvantage of this type of telescope is that this telescope produces color fringes, or the refracting telescope suffers from what we call chromatic aberration. But again, modern refracting telescopes now have correcting lenses that eliminates chromatic aberration or minimizes chromatic aberration. Alright, so again we have here the finder scope. So this finder scope allows you to locate your target. Okay, so this is a refracting telescope. Okay, so the largest refracting telescope is in the United States. It's in the Yerkes Observatory. Okay, The Yerkes Observatory was built in the late 1890s in Wisconsin. It houses the world's largest refracting telescope. Okay, the 77-acre facility in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, that houses the 40-inch, okay, that's 100-centimeter telescope, which is the largest refracting telescope ever built. And hanggang ngayon, hindi pa yan nahihigitan. That's still the largest refracting telescope. It is the Yerkes telescope at Yerkes Observatory in Wisconsin. Okay, here's the Yerkes Observatory, and inside is the Yerkes telescope. So my dear netizens, this is the largest refracting telescope in the world. It has a 40-inch objective lens. Okay? Ayan, malaki yan. See? Fantastic. Okay, so that's the Yerkes telescope. That's the largest refracting telescope. Okay, now disadvantages of the refracting telescope. The refracting telescope suffers from chromatic aberration. Okay, so when you say chromatic aberration, the lenses produces some color fringes. Okay, something like this. So when you look at the distant object, you will see some blue, green, or red color fringes in the final image. And that's not good. Okay, hindi magandang tignan yung final image with all of these color fringes. So many refracting telescopes suffer from chromatic aberration. But there are modern refracting telescopes that can correct such defect, okay, by using additional lenses to minimize chromatic aberration. Okay, ayan. So when you look at the image, there are color fringes, mga red, blue, yan, color fringes. Okay, this is Mars. And look at the image of Mars. Medyo hindi maganda. There are color fringes. So the invention of achromatic lenses correct this defect. Okay, achromatic lenses corrects chromatic aberration. Yan. Okay. So additional lenses are installed to minimize these color fringes. Okay. The second type of telescope is called the reflecting telescope. The reflecting telescope uses mirrors. Okay, the reflecting telescope reflects light off a concave mirror. Okay, that focuses the image and eventually produces the desired magnified image of the distant object. Okay, the reflecting telescope was designed by Isaac Newton, and this was the first reflecting telescope designed by Isaac Newton. Okay, hi, so this is Astronomy at Home, and I will be explaining how this thing works. So this is what we call a reflecting telescope. Okay, by the name itself, reflecting, this telescope uses mirrors to capture the light of a distant object. This telescope was designed by no other than Sir Isaac Newton himself. Okay, so inside the telescope tube is a concave mirror. So as you can see here, alright, so inside there is a concave mirror that collects the light, let's say, of a distant object, say the moon or a star or a planet. Then the collected light is bounced off a secondary mirror. There's a secondary mirror near the top of the telescope tube, and it is reflected onto this eyepiece. So if you look at the eyepiece, the image is magnified. Okay, what we have here also is a finder scope that allows you to locate your target. The telescope is mounted in an Equatorial Mount. So the Equatorial Mount is polar aligned, meaning that it is pointing at the North Star. But anyway, I will explain further the the use of the Equatorial Mount. Advantages of this reflecting telescope, well, it eliminates color fringes or chromatic aberration, and it is cheaper than the refracting telescope, which I will explain later. Okay. Okay, let me give you now a guided tour of the basic parts of this telescope. So this is the telescope tube. Right, this telescope is a reflecting telescope. Reflecting because this telescope uses mirrors to produce a magnified image. So inside the telescope tube is the primary mirror. You can see the primary mirror below the telescope tube. The primary mirror is a concave or spherical mirror. See that? And near the top of the telescope tube is a secondary flat mirror. There. So the primary mirror collects the light from the distant object and it brings it into a focal point. Then the flat mirror reflects the initial image onto this eyepiece. Okay, that's your eyepiece. This design was made by Isaac Newton. So this is what we call a Newtonian reflecting telescope. Alright, so we have here the focusing knob, and we have here the finder scope. The finder scope allows you to locate your target object. Okay, then below here we have two knobs. This is the declination knob, and this knob right here is the right ascension knob. Then we have here the counterweights, so it allows you to balance your telescope. And we have here the mount and tripod. The mount is called an equatorial mount. Anyway, we will explain later how the equatorial mount works. Okay, so those are the basic parts of this telescope, reflecting telescope. Okay, so that's your reflecting telescope. Now, one advantage of the reflecting telescope is that it eliminates chromatic aberration. Okay, or those color fringes that I mentioned a while ago. So, a reflecting telescope gives you a much clearer and sharper image as compared to a refractor. But again, the refractor also has its advantages and disadvantages. Alright? Okay. Now, the largest reflecting telescope is located in Spain. Now, as of 2013, the largest reflecting telescope in the world is the Gran Telescopio Canarias, which is located in Las Palmas, Spain. The objective mirror, okay, has a diameter of about 34.2 feet. Ang laki. Okay, or 10.4 meters. That's the objective mirror, the concave mirror. Okay? The diameter is 34.2 feet. So, ang laki niyan. So, this is the observatory that houses the largest reflecting telescope in the world, the Gran Telescopio Canarias. Okay, and that's the largest reflecting telescope in the world. Ayan, so that's the primary mirror or the objective mirror, which has a diameter of about 10 meters. Okay, 10.4 meters. Ang laki, di ba? Laki. Laking telescope na ito. Alright, so that's the Gran Telescopio Canarias. Also, in Hawaii, there is also the Keck Telescope. Malaki rin ito. The Keck Telescope. So, here's the Keck Telescope. Yan. I look at the primary mirror or the objective mirror. So, it's similar to the Gran Telescopio Canarias. Kaya lang mas malaki yun sa Spain. Okay, look at the size of the primary mirror. Okay, may mga segments, diba? Okay, and this is the Hale telescope. And so the primary mirror has a diameter of about 200 inches. Yan, a 200-inch mirror. Okay, so that's the Hale telescope. Here in the Philippines, we have the Pag-asa Astronomical Observatory in UP Diliman. Okay, in fact, that's the largest reflecting telescope here in the Philippines. It is located at the Pag-asa Astronomical Observatory. Okay, so that's the reflecting telescope. Here is the reflecting telescope at UP Nismed. Ito na, nagamit ko to once. Okay, pero ang madalas gumamit nito is si Sir Edmond Rosales. Ayan, that's him, the photo. Okay, this is the second largest reflecting telescope in the Philippines. The largest is at Pag-asa. Ang difference lang nila, mga centimeters lang. Okay? Okay, this type of telescope is what we call a catadioptric telescope. Okay, catadioptric, that means that it is a combination of both refractive and reflective elements. Now, in front of the telescope is a correcting lens. This correcting lens minimizes or corrects any color fringes or chromatic aberration. Then at the back of the telescope is the primary mirror. Then there's a secondary flat mirror. So, it's similar to the Newtonian telescope. But the only difference is that in front of this telescope is a correcting lens. So it is a combination of both refractive and reflective elements. So we call this a catadioptric telescope. Okay, so let us now study the so-called Equatorial Mount. So this reflecting telescope is mounted in what we call an equatorial mount. This is quite different from the altasimutal mount of the refracting telescope, the one that I mentioned a while ago. So, if you will notice, this part of the mount must be pointed at the polar star. The polar star is Polaris. So, we must look at the north. We must find first north using this digital compass. So if we find north, then this part of the equatorial mount should be pointed north, and this part is tilted at about 15 degrees from the horizontal. In fact, the North Star or Polaris is 15 degrees above the horizon, or 14.2 something degrees above the horizon. Okay, now you will notice that in the equatorial mount there are two knobs here. We have, this is what we call the declination knob, and this is the right ascension knob. So if your mount is polar aligned, and if you were able to find your target, all you need to adjust is the right ascension knob. Okay, right ascension, because if you will use your body, your front here is north, the back is south, your right hand here is east, and the sun, the moon, and the planets, they all rise east, eastward. So right ascension. So the moon and the planets, they ascend eastward. So right ascension. So if everything is polar aligned, then all you need to adjust is the right ascension knob. And this mount is very good for astrophotography. And if you have a motorized thing, you can attach it here and it will all be automatic. So that's the advantage of the equatorial mount, in contrast to the altasimutal mount. Okay. Alright, so at this point, let us now tackle a very important component of the telescope, which is the eyepiece. Now, your telescope is as good as your eyepiece. Okay, the eyepiece can greatly improve the capability of your telescope. Now, I have here my own eyepiece. Now, the workhorse of amateur astronomy is this eyepiece called Plausil. Okay, Plausil. And the eyepiece that I'm holding has a focal length of about 15 mm. Okay, I have here 15 mm eyepiece, Plausil eyepiece. Okay, alright, so I have here also another eyepiece, Plausil, but it has a focal length of 20 mm. Okay, so 20 mm and 15 mm. Okay, so baka tanong yan, ano mas maganda, 15 or 20 mm? Well, it depends. So, if you want your image to be magnified, then I suggest you use a 15 mm eyepiece. Okay, meron pa mga eyepiece na lower than 15. Okay, may 10 mm, you have 5 mm. So, as you lower the focal length of the eyepiece, you actually increase the magnification of the image. Okay? So, between 20 and 15 mm, which eyepiece would give you a greater magnification? What do you think? Alright, so you got it. It's the 15 mm. Okay? But the disadvantage of using an eyepiece with a lower focal length is that it also decreases the field of view. Okay? So, what is the field of view? So, when you see this, yan yung lens. So, pag sumilip tayo dun sa lens na yan, may circular area. Okay? And that circular area is your field of view. Alright? So, as you lower the focal length, let's say, to 10 mm, this is a 15 mm eyepiece, so 10, 5 mm, yes, you increase the magnification, but you also decrease the field of view, right? And in amateur astronomy, ayaw natin yung maliit yung field of view. We want to have a much larger field of view, para kitang-kita, malawak. Okay? Now, using this 20 mm eyepiece would do just that. Medyo malaki yung field of view nito, but of lesser magnification compared to 15 mm. So, depende. So, sir, ano bang gagamitin natin? 15 or 20? Depende sa gusto ninyo. So, if you want a wider field of view, kunyari, sisilip kayo sa buwan, but you want to photograph the moon with a wide field of view, ayun, eto, you can use the 20 mm eyepiece. Okay? If you want to photograph the moon with more detail, then I suggest you use a 15 mm eyepiece. Okay? This is Plausil. This is the workhorse of amateur astronomy. Ito yung madalas gamitin ng mga amateur astronomers. Okay, the Plausil eyepiece. Alright? Okay. Now, an important accessory that amateur astronomers must have is this one. Alright, this is called a Barlow Lens. Okay? So, what is a Barlow Lens? A Barlow Lens is a tele-negative amplifier. So, ano ibig sabihin nito? Now, the lens here is a diverging lens. So, ano siya? Concave lens. So what it does is it increases the focal length of your telescope. So if your focal length is increased, then that is translated to a higher magnification. So what a Barlow lens does is it increases the magnification of your image. Though ang ginagawa niya talaga is increasing the focal length of the telescope. Okay? So, you get your usual eyepiece, okay? And you insert the eyepiece onto the Barlow lens, like so. And you insert the Barlow lens with the eyepiece to the focuser of your telescope. Alright? Now, the Barlow lens is essential, especially in observing planets. Okay, like if you want to observe Jupiter with the Galilean moons or the rings of Saturn, then I suggest you make use of the Barlow lens. Okay, so the Barlow lens increases the focal length, and that is translated to a higher magnification. Okay, so this is a very important accessory for amateur astronomers, the Barlow lens. Okay. Now, a special type of eyepiece which is optional for the amateur astronomer is a zoom eyepiece. Okay, so this eyepiece that I'm holding is called a zoom eyepiece. Now, if you will look closely at the numbers etched in the eyepiece, so you have the numbers 8 to 24 mm. Okay, so what does that mean? Now, a zoom eyepiece will allow you to change the focal length of your eyepiece. So, between 8 to 24 mm. Okay, so what's the implication of that? So, by changing the focal length of your eyepiece, you can actually change the magnification of your telescope. Now, we know for a fact that an eyepiece with a lower focal length is translated to a higher magnification. So, if your eyepiece has a focal length of 8 mm, that would give you a higher magnification compared to an eyepiece with a 24 mm focal length. Okay, now this zoom eyepiece will allow you to shift or to change the focal length. So let's say in this eyepiece you are set to 24 mm, and if you want to increase the image, the magnification of the image, then you can just turn the eyepiece like so and shift to 8 mm by just turning the eyepiece. Okay, so by shifting the focal length from 24 to 8 mm, the magnification of your image would increase. See? So that's what a zoom eyepiece does. So what's the advantage of this? So this means that you don't need to change eyepieces from time to time. Okay? So let's say gusto nyo palitan yung magnification. So, magpapalit pa kayo ng eyepiece, di ba? From 20 mm eyepiece, magpapalit kayo to 8 mm eyepiece. So, that's quite tedious. Mabusisi po. But if you have a zoom eyepiece, you can just turn the eyepiece like so, and you change the focal length from 24 to 8, or vice versa, from 8 to 24. So, isa lang yung eyepiece niyo, but you can shift the focal length. So, para na rin kayong may mga eyepieces. Okay? So, nakatipid pa kayo. Right? So, that's the advantage of having a zoom eyepiece. And the field of view of a zoom eyepiece is much larger. Like, if you are in the 24 mm focal length, mas malaki yung field of view as compared to a regular Plössl eyepiece with the same focal length. Alright, so this is a zoom eyepiece. Anyway, this is just optional for the amateur astronomer. So it's up to you if you want one eyepiece and you can change the focal length, or you can have several eyepieces with different focal lengths. So that's up to the astronomer. Alright, anyway, this is the zoom eyepiece. Now, aside from the refracting and the reflecting telescopes, there are other types of telescopes used by the astronomer. And one such telescope is called a radio telescope. Now, a radio telescope focuses the incoming radio waves on an antenna, which, just like a radio antenna, absorbs and transmits these waves to an amplifier. So basically what a radio telescope does is it collects radio waves from deep space, okay, as compared to the refracting and the reflecting telescopes that collects light. A radio telescope collects radio waves, okay, using this huge antenna. Alright, so here is a diagram on how a radio telescope works. So a radio telescope is composed of a huge dish antenna. Parang satellite dish. Okay? Pero ito malaki. Okay? And these huge dish antenna, they collect radio waves from deep space. Okay? Then the weak radio signals are then received by an amplifier. Then the amplified radio signals are then brought to a computer for analysis. Okay? So instead of collecting light, a radio telescope collects radio waves. Okay? Alright, and this radio telescope is the second largest radio telescope in the world. This is the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico. This is used by SETI in the search for extraterrestrial life. SETI is the acronym for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Okay, second lang yan. The largest radio telescope is in China. Okay? Alright, so in this case, you have several dish antenna that receives signals para malawak yung range ng radio telescope. Okay, so you have an array of radio antennae that can receive and collect signals from deep space. Okay. Alright, so radio telescopes are much less affected by turbulence in the atmosphere, clouds, and weather. Unlike the refracting and the reflecting telescopes, okay, using those telescopes, we are at the mercy of the weather. So, pag maulap, wala na. Diba? Pag umuulan, wala na rin. You can't use the refracting or the reflecting telescope. So, in amateur astronomy, we are at the mercy of the weather. Pero itong radio telescopes, no. So, they are not affected by turbulence in the atmosphere, clouds, and the weather. So, radio telescopes can see through interstellar dust clouds that obscure visible wavelengths. So, kaya nilang i-penetrate yan. Okay? Alright. Now, another type of telescope is what we call the space telescopes. Space telescopes orbit above the Earth's atmosphere, okay, and thus produce clearer images as compared to Earth-based telescopes. So, they are not affected by the weather kasi nasa taas na sila ng Earth's atmosphere. They orbit the Earth. Okay, and the first space telescope is the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, built by NASA, the Hubble Space Telescope was put into orbit in April of 1990. Okay, so ito yung Hubble Space Telescope. Okay. Other space telescopes would include the Chandra X-ray Observatory, And we also have the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory. And in 2011, NASA plans to launch the James Webb Space Telescope. Okay, and that's a James Webb Telescope. This is the Chandra X-ray Telescope and the Kepler Space Telescope. I'm sure you're familiar with the Kepler Space Telescope. The main objective of the Kepler Space Telescope is to search for exoplanets. And that's what the Kepler Telescope did. The Kepler Telescope had discovered thousands of these exoplanets. Okay, so we are now beginning the search for planets outside our solar system and the possibility of life in one of those exoplanets. Alright? Okay, so those are the different types of telescopes used in astronomy.
Well, I guess that's about it for part 1 of Starry Night 2021. So we're done with the telescope workshop. Sana po marami kayong natutunan tungkol sa telescope. And I hope you would like and share this live stream para po makaabot sa mga estudyante dyan. So maraming salamat for watching, and kung meron po kayong mga questions or comments or pa-shoutout, please type in the comment section below. Wag po kayong mahiya and just type in your questions kung may mga katanungan kayo or comments about this telescope workshop. So we will now proceed with part 2 of Starry Night 2021. We will now proceed with the virtual telescope viewing. So are you not excited? Dito sa activity na ito, we will have a virtual telescope viewing of the night sky. So I have my telescope ready now. I have attached a webcam to the eyepiece of the telescope. That webcam is attached to my computer so that we can view the night sky virtually. Alright, so I guess we are now ready, and I guess the host is now ready. Magaling po ang ating host for this part 2, the virtual telescope viewing of the night sky. Okay, so here we go. Take it away.
Yan, hello, good evening, and welcome to Starry Night 2021. Magandang gabi po. This is Cajigal from the Beda Society of Young Astronomers. And ngayon po, tinitignan po natin ang full moon. Actually, ang full moon po ay kanina pang madaling araw, 3 a.m. So today is January 29. Okay, at around 9:30 in the evening. So yung maximum full moon po kanina po madaling araw, mga 3 a.m. So ngayon, papunta na to ng waning gibbous. So ito siguro mga 99% illumination. Pero parang full moon po na rin. Ayan, so just sit back and relax and enjoy this live telescope viewing of our moon. This is a virtual telescope viewing of our night sky. So ngayon we are featuring the moon. So this is called Starry Night 2021. We are celebrating the PISTA ng Santo Niño po sa Beda University. Okay po, so this is our moon at 99% illumination. Yung maximum full moon po ay kanina po madaling araw. So today is January 29, day 1 of our celebration of the Pista ng Santo Niño. Okay, so pa-shout out sa mga estudyante ko from 11 STEM. Maraming salamat. Halos lahat po kayo nanood kanina ng telescope workshop. Sana po marami kayong natutunan dun sa telescope workshop na yan. Okay, and maraming salamat at tuloy-tuloy po rin ang inyong panonood sa aming live free telescope viewing. Alright, hindi pa natin magawa yung talagang telescope viewing, yung may face-to-face kasi nasa tayo, general community quarantine at may banta pa ho ng COVID-19. So ito pa lang ho yung magagawa natin. We are bringing the telescope to you. Ayan. Okay. So ito po yung ating telescope viewing of the moon. Alright, so maraming salamat especially sa mga Bedans na nanonood po ngayon. At saka po kayo po, yung mga non-Bedans po na nakikinig po sa atin ngayon at nanonood po sa ating virtual telescope. Okay, so yung mga dark areas po na yan na nakikita nyo, those are lunar plains. Yan. And yung mga bright areas naman, those are lunar highlands and impact craters. Okay, so napakaganda po talaga ng ating buwan. So I would like to thank the Beda Society of Young Astronomers for making this event possible. Ayan po. And maraming salamat din po sa mga administrators po ng San Beda University Senior High School for supporting our events for the Pista ng Santo Niño. And kayo po, maraming salamat po for watching. Sana po matapos niyo po yung ating virtual telescope viewing of our moon. Okay, sa mga estudyante ko from 11 STEM, maraming salamat. Tutok lang kayo, tutok. And be amazed at our moon. Yan, salamat at clear skies. Kagabi, maulap at umuulan pa. At napakaswerte po natin ngayon. So again, this is Starry Night. We are celebrating yung Pista ng Santo Niño. San Beda University. Okay, meron ditong comment galing kay Michael Henotiba. So ano daw yung rotation ng moon? Is it clockwise or counterclockwise? Sige po. So ang moon po natin, it rotates on its axis in a counterclockwise direction. Pati yung revolution niya around the earth is also counterclockwise or anticlockwise. Okay po, isa lang po sa isang buwan lang sa solar system ang nag-rotate ng clockwise. And that is Triton. Triton is the largest moon of Neptune. So siya lang po ang natatanging buwan sa solar system that rotates in a clockwise direction. Pero yung iba, the rest, yung mga moons, they rotate in a counterclockwise direction. Just like our moon, ang moon natin rotates on its axis in a counterclockwise direction. And it revolves around the earth also in a counterclockwise direction. Ayan po. So, sana nasagot ko po yung katanungan ni Mr. Michael Henotiba. Maraming salamat po for watching Starry Night 2021. Okay, kung may mga katanungan pa ho kayo, just type in doon sa comment section natin. O kung gusto niyo po magpa-shoutout, just type in doon po sa ating comment section. At sasagutin po natin ang inyong mga katanungan about astronomy and our moon. Ayan, please also like and share our stream. Ayan, para makita din po ng mga estudyante dyan. Okay, like and share itong ating Starry Night 2021. So, happy feast day po sa ating lahat. From San Beda University. Viva Santo Niño! Ayan, sige, i-magnify natin ang buwan para makakita tayo ng details of the moon. Wow! Wow! Ayan po. That's our moon. Okay, ito po yung Tycho crater. Ayan, so nakikita nyo po yung Tycho crater. Ayan, napakalaking crater po niyan. And yan, ginigitna ko po yung Sea of Tranquility kung saan po naglanding yung Apollo 11. Yan, fantastic. Fantastic. Oh, that's our moon. Yun, look at the details. Sarap pumunta talaga sa buwan. Kayo po, gusto niyo bang pumunta sa buwan? Sige, ilagay niyo po sa comment section. At sabihin niyo, gusto niyo pumunta sa buwan. Okay. Yan, binabati ko din po yung mga estudyante ng ABM and Hume sa San Beda University Senior High School. Ayan, sana po nakatutok kayo ngayon. Saka po yung mga astronomy enthusiasts dyan ngayon, sana po nakatutok po kayo. And we are viewing the moon at 99% illumination. Ayan po. So, ang event po natin na ito is called STARRY, is a telescope workshop. Kanina po nag-telescope workshop kami. And this is now the virtual telescope viewing. Yan, share niyo po itong ating live stream ngayon, and please like our Facebook page, the Beda Society of Young Astronomers. Ayan po. So ito po yung ating moon at 99% illumination. Ayan, napakaganda talaga ng buwan. Okay, so sit back and relax and just enjoy our moon tonight. Ayan po ang ating full, actually 99% illumination ng ating buwan. Yung full moon po, kanina pa madaling araw yan, yung maximum niya 3 a.m. So today is January 29, 2021. And day 1 po ng ating celebration ng PISTA ng Santo Niño dito po sa San Beda University. Okay, I am Professor Jun Cajigal. At nakatutok po tayo ngayon sa buwan using my telescope. Okay, ayan po ang ating buwan. Maraming salamat po sa pagtutok niyo po sa aming event po ngayon called Starry Night 2021. So, in behalf of the officers and crew of the Beda Society of Young Astronomers, marami pong salamat sa mga tumutok po ngayong gabi. Sana po nag-enjoy po kayo dun sa aming humble virtual telescope viewing at yung kanina po yung telescope workshop. Sana po marami kayong natutunan. Okay, so enjoy the beauty of our moon. Okay, so kahit tapos na po yung ating live stream, kung meron po kayong mga katanungan about our moon, just type your questions or comments sa ating comment section below and sasagutin po namin ang inyong mga katanungan. Maraming salamat kay Mr. Michael Henoptiga sa kanyang tanong about the rotation of our moon. Okay, and yung moon natin, it also rotates in a synchronous rotation with the Earth. Kaya we only see one side of our moon. And the moon is in synchronous rotation with our Earth. And that's why we only see one side of the moon. Okay po, maraming salamat for watching sa ating Starry Night 2021. This is the second part of Starry Night. This is now our live telescope viewing of our moon. So good night po, maraming salamat po sa pagtutok. And tangkilikin niyo po yung aming Facebook page, Beda Society of Young Astronomers. Please like and share this live stream. Okay, maraming salamat po and mag-ingat po kayong lahat. Stay safe and happy Fiesta po sa ating lahat. Viva Santo Niño!